Welcome back to the Real Life Theology Podcast. Today's episode will help us understand the importance of making disciples who make disciples, starting new churches, and ensuring that these churches remain committed to biblical teaching and authority. Today's episode features Brett Andrews talking about Renew Movement church planting and vision. Here's the episode.
Call of the church is clear. Jesus said, go and make disciples of all nations. Actually, the word make is not in there. Go disciplate, he says. Aorist, imperative. As you go, disciple. What you do is discipling. Go discipling to all. By the way, I know nothing about Greek. I was really, by wonderful grace of Phryssene, I passed free, but I got my aorist adherence. We go discipling all nations. And here's the question. I asked a guy in our church, a guy on staff who is a strategic thinker. I said, how many people do you think at New Life understand the direct link between being a disciple and going into all nations and making disciples of all nations? He said, maybe 1%. That's what I want to talk about right now. That's what I'm going to give you a vision for. Renew exists, in my opinion, to fuel disciple making based on the teachings and the ways of Jesus. But if all we are, this has been our challenge from the very beginning, if all we do is make disciples who make disciples who make disciples who make disciples who are churches, then we don't go to all nations. To go to all nations, you have to start new churches. And so we are about a disciple-making movement that is a church planting. So if you want to look at this, New Life's vision, if I can share with you kind of how New Life's vision, and New Life's vision is Passion for Planting's vision, and Passion for Planting is Renew Movement at this point. But the Great Commission is starting new churches to go to all nations because there's no more effective means, right? Peter Wagner, do we all know that one? No more effective means of reaching lost people than starting new churches. And the statistics have demonstrated that to be true through the years. The most evangelistic churches are new churches. The older the churches, the less it tends to be evangelistic. So you got to start new churches. Well, what's the key to that? The key to starting new churches is, well, you need to have churches that are committed to church planting. When New Life began, we believed, Fairfax County at that point wasn't quite 1 million people. The Washington, D.C. area was not quite 4 million people. It's now over all of that. By the way, thank you for your tax dollars, because we have bigger houses because of your tax dollars that are going to our people. I'm sorry, and I'm cynical. People can go, we're going to help the poor. No, you're helping the rich people in Washington. But anyway, but we thought it's an awful small vision for us to say, God wants us to start a church that's going to reach 300 people and be able to pay our bills. No, God wants us to be a church that starts churches. This is the first of many that's getting started. Well, okay, so the first key is churches that are saying, we are a church planting church. One of our goals is for every church to realize you are one step away from being a church planting church, one decision away. You don't have to wait until you are 600 or 800. We started our first church when we were 300. But from the very beginning, you can, and how do we do that? Okay, so churches have to start churches, but more than that, so you have to be discipling other churches to be church planting churches. How do you do that? The key to that is networks. Starting church planting, pulling in other churches that are going to plant with you, and you're going to disciple them on how to plant churches. This came out of a conversation that Todd and I had when Todd Wilson was our executive minister after he left the nuclear Navy, and because isn't that everybody's path to ministry, nuclear engineer? But and we're in my office, and we said, okay, what is the key to a church planting movement? It's not mega churches. Mega churches can start churches like they can start new services. If we're going to have a church planting movement, the key is Meadville First Christian Church. I grew up in a small town, small church, 300 at most. It's those churches that want to get in the game but don't think they can. Helping regular churches, ordinary churches, it seems to be God's style to use ordinary people to do his work. And so how do you do that? Well, then you need to have churches that are church planted churches gather with them, churches that have never planted before, and together you plant churches. So there's reproduction of church planting churches. Well, what's the key to that? If you go all the way back to the disciple, the individual disciple must be growing and discipling. Our friend Bill Smith likes to say, if you are not a disciple unless you have a disciple who has a disciple. If go into all the world and make disciples is the definition of a disciple, then you aren't a disciple until you have a disciple, and technically you aren't a disciple until your disciple has a disciple. And so the key is this individual disciple hearing God's voice and following. By the way, that's our definition for a disciple. We use John 10:27. Jesus is the good shepherd. I know my sheep hear my voice and follow me. Because if the sheep hear the voice and follow the good shepherd, they're going to make disciples. Well, growing disciples make growing small groups of disciple and disciple makers. Reproducing small groups are what make for reproducing churches. Reproducing churches are what make for reproducing networks. Reproducing networks are what make for going to all the world. And so this is the thing to help you understand what that New Life has to understand. I'm trying to help New Life people understand you hearing God's voice daily, studying the Bible, praying, listening to God, praying for 5 people that you need to talk to about Christ, going wherever you're going and asking people, how can I pray for you? Looking for opportunities to start a spiritual conversation. That's the key to go into all the world and make disciples. I think a great example of that is what Carrie is doing where he is. Carrie would you share just the numbers and kind of the brief story of what you're doing, Carrie?
So we started in 2004 with a church plant of about 205 people. From the beginning of wanting to plant churches and make disciples. And that church grew and we're running around 600 to 650 now. We planted in 2014, 2017, 2020. We're planting again now. Those plants are going out with 20 to 25 people. And all those street plants, those were almost all people who were among. We saw 102 people on those church plants. 98 of those people we saw baptized at the Crossing Church. And generally speaking, we're unchurched prior to that. Out of that 98, we saw about 90 of those baptized through our campus ministry. And then another 5 or 6 through our high school ministry. And they went out and planted churches, and those churches are all growing now. And actually, our first plant that went out in 2014 is now already beginning to talk about planting their first church.
So how many people do you think attend churches, are part of churches that you've helped start? Do you have any idea?
Last Sunday, there were probably 1,200 maybe.
Okay, your church is 600. When was the first, how large were you when you started your first?
We planted in 2014. We were probably running about 350, 400.
Okay, couple of things that's really huge about it. First of all, do you understand how rare what he's doing is being done? But it's the biblical way, I think. It is. They're reaching lost people, making disciples. They're discipling and growing, and then they're hearing God's voice to say, we need to go start a church somewhere else. And since we tend to reproduce in like kind, they're reproducing other people who are reproducing. So any church is one decision away from being a church planting church. Reproduction at every stage, at every level is the key. It's not just churches saying, how do we as a church start new churches? Yes, churches do start in churches, but it is discipling churches who are making disciples who are open-handed. That's the other thing I want to say. I want us to appreciate about what Carrie has done. Carrie is not about building a big tree. He's about building the big orchard. You know, and then you go and make sense. So reproduction at every level. Where does new movement fit in? Where new movement fits in here in the network. One of the things that we've discovered is, well, I'll say it like this. I'm not sure. I'm trying to decide how to edit this. years ago. So the legal name of exponential, for those of you who are a part of it, who are familiar with exponential, was the Passion for Planting's legal name. And Todd, executive minister for us, then went on to become the director of Exponential while he stayed on staff with us, Todd Wilson. About 15 years ago, I said to Todd, Todd, there's something worse than not starting new churches. And that is starting new churches that within a generation or two are teaching false doctrine and heresy, are leading people to think that they're really following Jesus as Lord when they're not really following Jesus as Lord. But Exponential was always committed to not be too vague on doctrine. And part of the reason, I don't repeat this necessarily, but part of the reason that Todd resigned from Exponential was he realized renew is the way for the future. That the culture has changed in the last 20 years. That we have to be more clear about what we believe about the Bible and about some secondary doctrine. Egalitarian complementarian may seem like a secondary doctrine, and it's not going to lead somebody to salvation or not, but it is an open door for accepting homosexuality, homosexual marriage, because the same hermeneutic approach leads to that same conclusion. So Renew comes in because we realize we need to not just start churches, but we need to start churches that are committed to biblical teaching, biblical authority. To do that, we need more than just, we need a voice for those young pastors, because we've seen a lot of young church planters who hear more popular voices that go a different direction. But we also need accountability from the beginning in the church. For a church, right now, if you start a church, the way most churches start, their doctrinal faithfulness depends on the faithfulness of the senior minister and the faithfulness of the leaders that they raise up. But who are the first leaders? They're usually people from other denominations or people who haven't been Christians very long. So it's not uncommon for you to recruit a church planter to plant a church, and then within 5 years, they've changed their doctrine. Or for that church planter to move away in 5 years or 10 years, the people that they have developed don't hold necessarily to the commitments and the theology and the philosophy of the church or the church planting organization started them. And so all of a sudden, although they may be Christian church in name, they're not Christian church in commitments. And so
3 minutes.
Thanks. And so we wanted to start a network. It's by choice, it's not forced, of churches that are starting churches based on the teachings of Jesus and the commitment to make disciples who make disciples. So at the very beginning, they say we are a Renew church. We are committed to Renew doctrine. They are then part of Renew family. You have a family that's around you. Did you see the Harvard study, the 75-year study? What's the key to happiness? The number one key to happiness. They followed people for 75 years. I'm sorry, my mind goes in reverse. I'm just thinking how the people from Harvard who were conducting that study must have changed through the years. But anyway, first, they followed people for 75 years, and they discovered the number one key to happiness is significant relationships. It's community. What these church planters and church planting churches need is a community. That's the church. And so we create community for them, we create voice for them, we create accountability for them, ongoing training for them, ongoing community in Renew.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Real Life Theology Podcast. Coming up next, we have a conversation with Daniel McCoy on the crisis that we face. During this series, we are featuring conversations from a gathering at Harding University on the New Restoration movement. I hope to see you guys in the next episode.